Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to your Daily Penguin. This is our tour through my Penguin Classic wall behind me, book by book, author by author. We aren't going to get to them all in 2020. And once I realized that, I decided to theme out some of the rest of our penguins. I did a little bit of Victober in celebration of all things Victorian, and I am now doing Nonfiction November, another big BookTube event. Lots and lots of fun. If you haven't participated, you should. That's organized by Olive at A Book Olive and a bunch of other co-hosts, in which you are encouraged to read more nonfiction, my side of the street, in which you are encouraged to see it for the incredibly wide and inviting type of writing that it is. Instead of the bad brush that it gets tarred with, I suspect, early in school of being work, being homework. So I thought that for the month of November, we would do by far the most. We would stress the majority of our penguins would be nonfiction. And today we're doing a book that came out in like 1915 or something like that, and that has widely been regarded as one of the greatest pieces of travel writing of all time, although the author would have laughed at that kind of description. This is The Worst Journey in the World by Apsley Cherry Gerard. This author, Cherry Gerard, was the youngest member of Scott's second Antarctic expedition and was originally turned down. He originally tried in the tried and true nature of parvenus everywhere to buy his way into that expedition with a huge amount of money. And when he was turned down, he offered the money anyway. And that appealed to the quixotic adventurer in Scott, who took him because of that as a junior zoologist or something like that. I don't remember what the exact designation was. He was a dog's body. Very young when he went, in his early 20s, I think. And they went to what was then and is still now the end of the world, Antarctica. An amazing place. I have been there. I've been there in the wrong season and in the wrong places. There are right now, today in 2020, at least in 2019, there are tours that you could take. That were lots of fun, guaranteed. One tour even guaranteed that you would never experience a moment of discomfort. That was in their brochure. I went under different circumstances a very, very long time ago, long before there were regular tours, and got to experience a little bit of what it was like, of what it's like in the Antarctic, and it is another planet. It really is. The gravity is different, the sunlight is different, the starlight is different, and of course, you're on the edge of the world. You're on the edge of the planet. So it's freezing cold, just relentlessly freezing cold. And it has life forms that are weird, that are very strange. When you're first getting there, when you're first going there, if you're going by sea, you will notice birds. The birds will start to turn. The birds will start to change. That's what Captain Cook noticed in 1772 and 1773 and 1774, when he started nosing a wooden, wind-driven vessel to the outskirts of Antarctica. Incredible that he could do it, much less that he would continue to persist in doing it. At one point in his travels, he realized that his men didn't even have long sleeves. Had to do something about that. But the closer you get, the more you realize that this is, in fact, an alien planet. It's as alien as the bottom of the ocean. The bottoms of Earth's oceans have never seen sunlight. They only get a particulate rain of biological matter from the higher reaches, but that's the only even remotely articulated manifestations of anything that was ever touched by sunlight. That's the only thing that the depths of Earth's oceans ever get, and those depths are teeming with life. It's grown up around thermal vents and lives on that rain of organic material or on whatever else is available at depths that can crush iron. And the same thing is true of the Antarctic, where you have penguins. You have giant penguins that are entirely evolved to specialize in this weather. And it almost kills them. If they didn't have behavioral adaptations as well as physical adaptations, it would kill them. And at one point in his expedition, Apsley Gerard and two other men went apart. They went on a separate expedition to collect a penguin egg. Great big penguin egg. They wanted to collect one. And they hit terrible terrain. They weren't particularly qualified for the across-terrain trek that they were taking. No one really was at the time, except maybe Scott himself, who wasn't there. And in addition to not being qualified for the terrain was also monstrous. And in addition to that, when they got where they were going, roughly speaking, when they got where they were going and camped on the skirts of a place called Mount Terror, which should have been their first clue, they got smacked by the mother of all blizzards. Just a gigantic storm that ripped apart their shelter. All shelter. Ripped apart everything. The blizzards can reshape the landscape. Suddenly these guys found themselves alone and unsheltered, sheltering on the open ground in the Antarctic, where the temperatures can go to 100 below zero Fahrenheit. And there were a lot of other complications involved as well. Scott's party, of course, starved to death before they could reach a depot of supplies, and had to sit there. Even efforts to recover them were thwarted by the severity of the Antarctic for years, until an expedition could finally get there and find their perfectly frozen bodies and all of their journals and all of their scientific equipment and all of their specimens, all of that. Apsley Gerard and his men and his two companions managed to collect, if you want to call it that, 3 penguin eggs, and you can still see them. We still have them. But it was that horrific time in the Antarctic that he decided to transform into a book. And it's a strange book. And I like it. I like it a lot. I'm very glad that it's in the Penguin Classic line. But I'm perfectly willing to admit it takes time to get into this narrative. This author is very eloquent and very smart, but he's not a natural storyteller. And you can tell by the way the thing begins. Good Lord. It has a really snappy opening 2 lines that I don't believe the author actually wrote. I think they can be fairly easily attributed to someone much more famous. But then it stumbles into an anecdote about Cook eating a dog, and then sort of stumbles onward, constantly, somewhat defensively, pointing out that earlier Antarctic expedition accounts often seem to require the reader to know more than they are telling them, but also doing the same thing, committing the same sin. So it's only around 50 or 60 pages in, maybe even more than that this author really gets his stride, really starts to tell his story. I think largely because it's at that point that he doesn't feel anymore that he is jumping in and made a race. He feels like he has now written enough so that if you're still with him, he can just tell the story without needing to backtrack or give tedious précis of history or anything like that. And that's what happens. So I guess the reason I'm stumbling a bit here is because I've never really understood the plaudits that are given to this book. Not really. I understand it's important. I understand that the author saw and did things that are amazing, and I understand that, like, for instance, the last 3/4 of this book are rousingly good. But that means the first quarter is not. And it seems to me that if we're going to laud travel writing books, there are plenty that don't make that mistake. But one way or another, this is a remarkable reading experience. There's a lot that could be said about this author. He led a very fascinating life, went on to serve in World War I, lived until the middle of the 20th century, I think 1960, something like that. And yet, I don't think I've ever read a biography of him. I'm sure they exist. They're probably more readily available in the UK than they are in America. I just have to go with what he tells me and when he crops up in other books, and also in the introduction to things like the Penguin Classic of this. There was also a cute little hardcover of this. I'm trying to remember the name of the series. I saw one of them, at least one, on Mark Richardson's channel, I think during his Epic Library tour years ago. They're squat little hardcover editions, and whoever they are, they did one of The Worst Journey in the World. I can't remember the name of them. I want to say Chronicle Books, but that might just be the publisher. But one way or another, I've had other editions of this book, and I don't anymore. I'm perfectly happy with just the Penguin. This Penguin is curated by Carolyn Alexander, who wrote Endurance, that is a polar expedition book that hardly needs an introduction. This kind of does. Not a lot of people have read this book that I've ever met. It is definitely a recommend, especially if you are, if you fancy exploration literature. That's the reason why I would hesitate to call this great travel writing. Uh, Exploration literature is a little more like it. Travel writing seems to me to be what that brochure promised, that you never experience a moment of discomfort. Exploration, especially places where hardly anybody's ever been, where you're breaking new ground, it's entirely likely that when Apster Girard and his colleagues were camping at the foot of Mount Terror, it's entirely likely that no human being had ever camped there before. I think it's a dead certainty that no human being in the history of humanity had ever touched an emperor penguin egg with their hands before. I bet that's just a dead certainty, and probably a lot of other things too. It's entirely likely, for instance, that no white man had ever seen anything near the fields and fields of merciless, grinding, singing, shrieking pack ice that Captain Cook saw in 1772, 1773. These are all firsts, and that seems to me to warrant a different kind of writing than the sobriquet of travel writing. So exploration writing, this is right up there. I can't off the top of my head remember what else Penguin does in this line. There was a famous anthology of people writing about Scott that had 1 million editions. Those of you in the UK might know it better than I do. I don't think Penguin ever did that. I don't know how much polar exploration literature they've ever done, but I'm glad they did this one. So that's your Penguin classic for today. It feels a little guilty to be highlighting this book today because, as promised, I swear, it's Thursday, and on Monday, I did not believe it. I flat out did not believe it. Even though I could look at the data for myself, the meteorological data for myself was clear. Nevertheless, on Monday, when reports were coming in that New England would be experiencing spring-like warmth, that it would come and settle in, that it wasn't just going to be a freakish afternoon, it was going to come and settle in, and the days were going to be comfortable, I didn't believe it. Because on Monday it was bone-crackingly cold. Of course, everything to me is bone-crackingly cold. I look back at my time in Antarctica now, and I don't think I could have done it at all. Although I had quite a bit of canine help. But anyway, it has actually come. The weather has actually arrived. Today is going to be almost 70 degrees Fahrenheit at its peak. That's incredible. That's just going to keep going. 5, 6, 7 days in a row. That's just going to keep going. So it feels a little guilty to be talking about this book when Boston is experiencing a bit of spring in early November. But nevertheless, if this is the sort of thing that interests you, this is a big summit to knock off. So your Penguin is a recommend. And who knows what we'll encounter tomorrow? We'll do more nonfiction. And once again, I will try to remember to leave the links to all the nonfiction November stuff. I keep promising to do that, and I think I keep forgetting to do that. I'll try and remember. But anyway, that is your Penguin Classic for today. We will reconvene tomorrow for another one. Thank you, Penguin. Thank you, Penguin. Did I just say thank you, Penguin? I did. Thank you, BookTube.